look, as a former president's chief of staff, and knowing that the president is the commander in chief, this was a real missed opportunity to do the right thing in dealing with a bunch of respected and battle-tested commanders. They just blew it, frankly. They blew it.
Let me pick up on one or two things. Trump said that the military is trained to go into American cities. You were defense secretary. Is that what those men and women officers train for?
Look, the most important thing about our military is that we have tried and made clear that they should not be politicized, that their main job is to fight our foreign adversaries that threaten our country. That's what it's about. It's not about law enforcement. It's not about being cops in the street. We have laws that make clear that our military is there to protect us from foreign enemies. And that's what it's about. And so to suddenly talk about our primary mission being deployed into the cities of this country and doing basically law enforcement is to really, in many ways, undermine the real purpose of our military. We have the strongest military on the face of the earth. We've got the best fighting men and women on the face of the earth. And the purpose of that is to defend us and protect our national security. It's not to deploy these people to the cities in this country. And it's not to certainly have them train in the cities of this country. They need training, and they get training on how to conduct wars, how to deal with drones, how to deal with technology, how to deal with some of the weapon systems that we're seeing today. That's what they need to be trained on, not trained on the streets of America. That is just undermining the real purpose of having a military.
Well, in that context, the administration said, Hex has said, that they're reshaping priorities to focus more on the homeland threats and downplaying America's role in places like Africa and Europe. What are the consequences of that, Leon?
Well, the consequences is that we're going to be a weaker country as a result. Because, the real strength of our country is that we've been a world leader. And that goes back to World War II for 80 years. And by the way, whether you were a Republican president or a Democratic president, they may have had their differences on policies, but the reality is that when it came to national defense, they all took the same role of world leadership. Recognized that the United States had to be a world leader, recognized that the United States had to build alliances, recognized that the United States had to have the strongest military in the world. And they were willing to stand up to dictators and to tyrants. Republicans and Democrats for 80 years all followed pretty much those same principles. And now we're being told that the main threat is on the streets of America. There's no question we have threats in this country. There's no question we have to deal with crime. But we have ways to deal with crime. It's called police. It's called law enforcement. It's called the FBI. Those are the ways we deal with enforcing the law here in this country. But when it comes to threats abroad, that's a role for the United States military. And that's why having 800 military commanders come to a meeting from across the world and then not talk about what they're concerned about, what they're out there fighting against, was just, irresponsible leadership.
Yeah, I one more, and then I'm going to turn it over to James. Defense Secretary Hegseth railed against woke military personnel and policies. By his standards, I suspect he would have called the appointment of Colin Powell woke. But he suggested women really aren't up to being a fighting force. He did say you have to be fit, not fat. maybe he ought to give a lecture to his commander in chief. But in any event, I mean, you know more about the military than almost anyone. Is it too woke, and are women unfit for combat?
It really concerns me that a Secretary of Defense does not even begin to understand why we have the strongest military in the world. We have the strongest military in the world because we allow people to serve in the military, men and women and others who want to serve in the United States of America. And I have to tell you, I've looked into the eyes of our men and women in uniform. They're prepared to fight and die for our country. That's what our military is all about. And I've seen women
Okay, and we are live here in Boston Praise Radio and TV Network. I'm Pastor Hobbs, live here in the studio with my guest, Marvin Matillier.
Matillier.
I'm going to get that.
But no, you're good. You're good.
I'm trying.
I think I told you this last time. I used to screw up my name all the time. Matillier. My parents were like, you better start saying it the right way.
Right. So it takes a little practice. But welcome. How are you, sir?
I'm good. I'm feeling refreshed. I'm feeling refreshed. I mean, this past month has been really great. I've been able to let my hair down, right, a bit, get to reflect, get to reset, spend a lot of time and moments with my family, especially around the holidays. So I'm feeling pretty good. And I'm ready for the next.
All right.
What's going on next, right? So that's what I'm looking towards.
So talk about it. One, thank you for your candidacy. I think it's admirable. It was wonderful talking to you and hearing your platform, and just I think anybody whom puts their hat in the ring to be able to run for elected office, we applaud that because you had some great experience,
Thank you.
some great proposals, and my thing is when. It's always a win, right? Because there are issues that are raised, even if one doesn't become elected in that position.
Right.
So, tell us, what are your plans? What do you do? What now? What are your plans with all the folks who voted for you, and just your strategy and the things you lifted up? How do you move forward, and what can we expect? From you now.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you alluded to a lot of things here, and it's so funny. I'm gonna make sure I answer that piece there, but I just want to take a step back here. Sure. It was mind-boggling, and I had to reflect on this here because after November 4th, or even the night of November 4th, people came up, they shook my hand, and they said congratulations. And I had a hard time understanding that, right? We came in 7th, right? We're trying to go for one of those 4 seats. So, by paper, we lost, right? But to what you said to me, sir, on the fact of being able to just get your name out there, and put yourself out there, get scrutinized, right? People start digging into you, right? It's a lot. And prior to me running, I never really truly understood that until I was in that position where it is a lot of work for you to run a campaign. And I'm really proud of the team that we were able to build to help really support this campaign. I mean, there were 8 phenomenal candidates. I was happy to be one of those candidates, but we were the only one that had no connection to City Hall. And we did a phenomenal job gaining some major momentum and some support. So thank you so much. Now I hear when people say congratulations, whether win or lose, that's something. And, not win or lose, win or learn, because I've learned a lot from this experience here that I plan to leverage and use in the future, right? So, pivoting to your question there, what's next? I think that's something I'm still working on, trying to figure out, but I know at the core of it, what is next for me is continue to serve the public, continue to serve the city of Boston, right? On and different occasions. My wife and I, we still have our amazing cafe, Ula Cafe, and we want to make sure that we are not just, offering coffee, refreshments, sandwiches, and things of that nature, but offering a space where people could come together and feel that they have a safe space to express themselves, whether through art, whether through singing. We want to do our Ula After Dark events. We want to be able to have panel discussions that might hit home for a lot of people when it comes to social injustice and things of that nature, right? So we want to be able to have those conversations, find ways for us to brainstorm, and if it makes sense, how do we mobilize to fix a lot of systemic issues that we see that's impacting our city, our Commonwealth, and our country? Me being a descendant of Haitians, that's something that's always going to be obviously near and dear to my heart, right? Because that's in my DNA. So I want to make sure that I am out there helping out, supporting, the immigrant community, especially during the time of things that we're seeing right now. That's plaguing the immigrant community. I'm a Black man. I want to continue to support my Black brothers and sisters out there as well too. So looking at different ways for me to go ahead and do that. One thing as a young Black man is that I've held multiple positions, whether working in business, being in the Marine Corps, I'm still a Marine officer, right? Having all these, and I've had mentors. Very rarely if I had a Black mentor, right, that can help me walk through and navigate on how to go ahead and elevate, right? I never really had those. So I want to make sure I'm giving back to the next generation. I want to be able to find ways where I could be that mentor and find those mentees and kind of help navigate them as well when it comes down to it. And of course, I want to be able to focus on the veterans. That's something that's near and dear to me. So finding ways for me to work with veterans, and going back to the Marine Corps, I'm still doing my thing. So this weekend I was supposed to go to drill this upcoming weekend. They're giving me command. So I'm gonna get a unit of my own that I'll be working with, training and things of that nature. So a lot of good stuff is happening for me. And when the time is right, I'm gonna say, hey, you know what? I think I'm ready to go ahead and put my name back out there. But I'm going to continue to support the people of Boston in the best way I can.
Outstanding. I know I appreciate the mentor commitment. I think you're absolutely right. As Black men, we need mentors. And you mentioned the cafe. And I'll share with you, we being Healing Our Land, we are actually interested, we're actually looking at a property right now in Dorchester to have to be a component of it for reentry, right? For people who are directly impacted coming into society, but also a mechanism of community and an economic engine to sustain the programming so that it's not the ebb and flow of grants and political climate, but it's sustainable and offering, as your cafe offers, a resource for community to come together. So I really would love to potentially explore being menteed under you in that regard, because again, it's a vision. But it's not something that I've walked through before. Right. I have a gentleman who's directly impacted, who has opened businesses and done. In fact, we just signed a 3-year lease in Worcester, where he's from, and it has, I want to say, 13 units of people whom are ultimately for reentry. It'll have training for people to develop personally and professionally.
Oh, that's awesome.
Because he's understanding, and I concur, doesn't matter how gifted and how talented one is, if you don't develop personally, then you'll tear down whatever gifts you have to be able to develop professionally, won't be able to be sustainable.
Exactly.
That character development.
You're using all your capacity and capabilities on yourself because you haven't been able to develop personally, that you don't have the wherewithal or the capacity or bandwidth to focus professionally, right?
Yes.
So that's, oh man, I love that. I would love to be able to work with you on that, because I think that is something that's also important for me too. I know we had this conversation last time about how do we how do we make sure that we're taking people that are coming back, reentry that's coming back into society, right? Making sure that they have the skill, they have the, not the skills, excuse me, the tools that they need, right? For them to develop themselves professionally and personally, but then also give back to society, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that would be really cool. I'd love to be able to sit down and talk more with you on something like this, what this joint venture would look like, and just have a discussion.
Amen. And the other thing we had talked about as a person whom I still want to follow up with regard to your consult for personally as upgrading my discharge status.
Yes. That's on me. I should have reached back out to you. I'm so sorry about that.
You just, what I'm saying, you just came out the campaign and so forth, and but I definitely I need to do that because that's as a person whom, as I shared before, loved being in the military, and unfortunately my discharge status, as you know, was uncharacterized,
right.
And so I need to change that. And I've had difficulty being able to get support around that. There, quite candidly, the Harvard Law School,
Harvard Law Services or HLS.
I want to say Harvard Law School.
Okay,
because actually is a gentleman who works with us, who goes there, who's one of the volunteers that goes with us behind the wall, and I mentioned it to him. And unfortunately, I can't tell you how many times I left calls and just have not gotten a response. And that's one of the things I understand they're tasked to do is to be able to help with discharge upgrades.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I told you this before, but prior to the campaign, I used to work for Massachusetts Executive Office of Veteran Services.
Yes.
I was a deputy chief engagement officer there, where my job was to provide services or support for all veterans throughout the whole Commonwealth, right? And one of the things that we would do a lot of, right, is looking at those upgrades, and how to go ahead and I don't know if you heard, but like there's this new legislative package change, the HERO Act, that came out that was signed into law by Maura Healey over a year and a half ago, right? So there's been some updates and changes on what you can and cannot do, but one of the things they look at is making those upgrade changes, especially when it comes to your DD-214 and things of that nature, right? So I would love to get you in contact with either folks up at Veteran Services or even folks within the Boston Veteran Services. And I know that there's specific organizations. I'm part of American Legion Post 76, where they have people that's able to help support in that as well. So again, I'm going to make sure I do my due diligence to reach out to you so we can get that taken care of, because that is important.
Thank you. And in that same vein, I think we also talked about
if there are any veterans, right, that's on this call here, that's trying to figure out, okay, I've served my country, I've done my part, I was one of the very, very few that decide to go ahead and raise my right hand, but you're not getting the support, the benefits that you need. Please, I don't know if there's a way I could be able to have them reach out to me, but I would love them to go ahead and reach out to me if needed to as well. Too.
Please.
617-858-5461. I'll say it again. It's 617-858-5461. So just go ahead and give me a call. Again, I'm not longer in that full capacity within that space, but I do know a lot of people that's in that space, and I can make sure that you're getting the support that you need. There are a lot of unfortunate, Black veterans, people of color veterans that are historically held back when it comes to getting their support, when it comes to getting their benefits. So we got to go ahead and change that as much as we can.
Amazing. I and just for those who may have not been tuned on the broadcast before, I was discharged because I tested positive for HIV, and at that time, you just were kicked out. Your benefits were cut off immediately, and now, obviously, with the progression and the and education and advancement in treatment. Right, because you can now take HIV medications to prophylactically prevent from even getting it. You can serve with HIV because it's no longer the death sentence, and it's not scary like it was, unfortunately, when I was diagnosed.
Absolutely. Back in 80s, 90s, right? That was huge. Yeah, absolutely. Let's make sure we make that happen.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So shifting gears with that. So with regard to as you talked about immigration, right? I mean, I think what for as a person who's a Haitian American, were you born here? Or?
Yeah, I was born in the States.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, what would you say to people whom are Haitian, not only Haitian, but people, even African Americans, people who are concerned or with regard to ICE and being, just stopped. I know there's a gentleman, Ron Bell, who has a booklet, Know Your Rights, and I think those are some of the kind of things that we're trying to be able to do, is make sure that people understand their rights, as it relates to ICE.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's something that you have any insight or resources.
Yeah. What's so funny, you probably saw me, I was trying to dig in my coat pocket here. Usually, I'm failing myself. Usually I have these cards, these red cards, Know Your Rights cards, right? And they have them in different languages, right? And, I usually like to pass them out, right? So either people within the immigrant community, allies, whatever the case may be, it's like, hey, if you're encountered by a federal agent, an ICE agent, these are your rights. This is what you can do, and legally, and so on and so forth, right? I wish I had that on me. But that's something that we want to be able to do and continue to push. I know at our cafe, we have, whenever you get a chance, we'll love for you to come over to the cafe.
Yes.
But, if you look up on the wall, we have like Know Your Rights training, when they're going to be, bystander training. I know there's a lot of organizations that's doing that as well, letting people know what kind of resources you could reach out to and how to go about it. There are different types of messaging apps or things of that nature that let you know, like, hey, here's an ICE agent, that's in the presence of, this neighborhood, and so on and so forth, right? So there are mechanisms that we are doing in the community level to ensure, at the best that we can do, that we are taking care of our neighbors as best as we can. It's still hard, right? As we've seen, ICE agents are running rampant in all different cities and whatnot. But what I do love about the neighborhoods that we live here in Boston is that you do have people standing up. You do have neighbors coming out, and they're saying, hey, not so fast. I'll tell you a quick story. Yeah. So I live in Eggleston Square. Right. It's predominantly, Dominicans that live there, a lot of Dominican businesses that are there too. And I'm part of this WhatsApp group. It's the Eggleston Square Main Street group. And I saw a message that came out from the Main Street director that ICE is in a location, just be very careful. Here's the downside to that, right? Again, we're talking about businesses. It's the Main Street. Majority of those businesses had to be closed until 11 o'clock noon time frame, because a lot of people are afraid to come on out, right? And they own these businesses. So what do you think that's doing to their bottom line? Sure. What do you think that's doing to their sales and revenue, right? They just miss a half a day because of ICE presence, which is not fair. We're living in a time of fear, which is it's not good. The flip side of that, although we're living in this time of fear, I also feel that we see in a lot of neighborhoods, we're living in a time of, collaboration. Community collaboration. The reason why I say that is because when that message came on out, man, you saw neighbors coming out. They weren't going to do anything, but they wanted to make sure that there was ICE knew that there was a presence here. It's just like, and there was this elderly woman. Somebody else told me there was this elderly woman that went up to this ICE agent asking, "Why are you here?" And the agent said, "Well, I'm here for your protection." And she said, "I don't feel protected. You have to go." Right. So if I say all this because you asked me, when it comes to immigrants, Haitian immigrants, African Americans, things of that nature, what's the message? The message is that I think twofold, right? We need to continue, and I think our elected officials, they're doing everything that they can at the city level, but we need to continue to pressure them to ensure that they are crafting and creating policies that are keeping our immigrants, our community safe, because everyone that's working in the city of Boston that's doing their part, they're contributing, economically contributing, they're part of the system. They're progressing, they're helping our city out, including our immigrant community. Absolutely. Right? So if we go ahead and scare them and we push them off to the side, that's going to not just hurt that specific group, that's going to hurt everyone, right? So continue to make sure that your city councilors, make sure the mayor knows that we need to have the support, crafting policies that's going to mitigate the movement of ICE around the neighborhood as much as possible. But at the same time, too, make sure that you know that we have neighbors that are doing their part, right? In a safe, peaceful manner, that they're showing that there's presence there. They're recording. They're letting people know that we don't want you here because we know that, you're stoking fear because of the guy in the White House, right? So I love being able to see that from my neighborhoods. And I love even with some of what our city councilors are doing, right? I know that we passed a Boston Trust Act, which is, eliminating the communication collaboration between our police officers and ICE agents, right? I think that's something that's major. I want to see more effects like that as well. But there are things that we're able to do that's working. And I know that there's a lot of nonprofit organizations that are standing up to make sure that we have toolkits that's available to go ahead and mitigate the efforts of ICE as much as we can, again, in a peaceful manner.
Outstanding. Two things I want to say. One is talk a little bit more about the cafe for those who weren't on the initial broadcast. Educate. Tell us about all about it. Like this.
Yeah. So it's called ULA Cafe. That's ULA Cafe. It's in Jamaica Plain, 284 Amory Street. It's in the Sam Adams Brewery Complex.
Yes.
Right. It's near Mike's Fitness, Bikes Not Bombs, not too far from Stony Brook Station. Right. And hopefully that gives you a good layout of exactly where it is. It's been around since 2007. And my wife and I, we're the third owners. We took it over back in 2021 when, we're still dealing with COVID. My wife and I had our second baby and there was a lot going on. But, we've been able to pretty much continue on with the passing of a torch to make sure that it is something that the community wants to continue to see and have. I joke around and say, if we try to make any changes to the paint on the wall or the lettering, the community is going to come after us, right? Because it's for the community, right? But at the end of the day, that also let us know how important and powerful it is. So ULA Cafe, it's a cafe, but we also sell coffee, different types of caffeinated drinks, espressos, lattes, things of that nature. We do sandwiches. We also have a bakery in the back. So we do popovers, muffins, cookies, what have you. But in the evening time, what we also try to focus on are community engagement events. Before I even go to the community engagement events, one thing that my wife and we worked on was this thing called the Pay It Forward wall. Okay, so the Pay It Forward wall is super cool. Let's just say that you come on in, you purchase a sandwich for yourself, and you're like, you know what? I know the sandwich costs $6. Let me give you another $6 because I know that there's someone out there that can't afford a sandwich. So when it comes to ULA, they could go to this Pay It Forward wall and they could redeem that card that could give them a sandwich. That's our way of enabling our community to give back to our community, right? So that's been one of the things that I think that we're like one of the first establishments to do that within the greater Boston, area. And I think there are other people that are doing it. But that's just been a big thing where people are like really excited about that. We try to do more of it now, especially because of the whole SNAP fiasco that we're dealing with. We're trying to make sure that, hey, if you're on SNAP and because of the cuts and things of that nature, you can always find food over here at ULA for yourself and your family, right? So the Pay It Forward wall has been phenomenal, and we're super happy about that. In the evening time, we're trying to do more of it, especially as it's getting darker earlier. But ULA After Dark, where, like I said earlier, we do a lot of community events. So open mic night. Nice. We're trying to make sure, we do a poetry slam. We try to have, tough, impactful discussions when it comes to social injustice, social reforms, things of that nature. And we've done quite a few of those as well. Another thing is that we want to make sure that we have our local artists that could be able to showcase their work. So we have local artists. They're able to hang up all their artwork. When you come over to ULA, you'll see phenomenal art from local artists. And we tell them, they're like, hey, how much do we have to pay to rent off this wall? We're like, nothing. You don't have to pay anything. And once you sell one of yours, that's all yours, 100%.
Wow.
Right? Because that's work. That's their work, right?
Nice.
And the hardest thing they have to do is, and that's financially, could be straining for a lot of people, is find a place for them to actually put up that work. And then from that, once they sell it, proceeds goes to that. That's not fair. That's not right? So we want to make sure that they're able to have a space where people can enjoy their art, right? And then if they're able to sell it off, that money goes to them, so they can continue to do that kind of work. So,
Beautiful.
so we're doing more of that. We're crossing our fingers, hoping that we're going to get a beer and wine license.
I was going to say that's something that I know that Councilwoman Presley advocated for, and I saw an article saying that there was a challenge. Like, it seemed like why there weren't more businesses or black businesses, because this was really targeted to these communities to be able to get those licenses. So what's what is the process? What is the hold up? Is it okay?
So it's been a long process. I think. So we're, and I want to thank, there's been a handful of elected officials who's been behind this, at the state and at the state level, at the city level. So Senator Liz Miranda, I know she played a role in trying to make sure that there are more beer and wine licenses out there. I know I think both the Borrell brothers played a major role in that as well too, trying to push to make sure that more black and brown businesses could be able to get these, right? Because, unfortunately, it's back in the day, it's been for those who had resources and connections that would get them, right?
Yes.
Whereas folks like us, we continue to be in survival mode for our businesses. This is leveling the playing field, right? Because now we have a second or third piece of way for us to generate more revenue through beer and wine licenses, right? So I want to give those shout outs to the Worrell brothers as well as Senator Liz Miranda for really pushing this to make this happen. Now let's talk about the process.
Yes, please.
The process has been fairly long for us because in certain neighborhoods, right, where there is a lack of beer and wine licenses, where people realize that there's not a place for them to actually go and enjoy a beer or two, a wine or two, in certain neighborhoods, they've been allotted a license, X amount of licenses for those specific business. So again, in Jamaica Plain, we already have, dare if I say, a handful of businesses that's been awarded these beer and wine licenses. I think right now what's happening, they're like, okay, Ula Cafe, you've already gone through the process, which I'll go through. Let's just hold off for the next couple of months or until next year for us to go ahead and revisit your application. Yeah, so it's just like, we were hoping back in May that we're going to get the green light for this, so that come, June, July timeframe, we could start working on our wine bar, at nighttime, opening until 10 o'clock in the evening. But it's okay, right? So I know the city of Boston, they're trying to be like, hey, even playing field. We got a couple of places here, shout outs to Jado, which is out in Center Street in Jamaica Plain. I think AAA also got a beer and wine in Jamaica Plain. And there's been a couple other ones. So they're like, hey, let's just chill for a bit. We're going to revisit this. The process, though, was very long, right? Because you had to go through multiple, you had to, apply. My wife and I, we created a whole slide on why it will be beneficial and important for us to have this. And, we had to present it at community events, right? So we had to, we had a butters meeting. They came in trying to make sure they were good to go with this. I had to go out and flyer. Good thing I'm used to knocking on doors, right? But I had to go out and flyer and make sure that people knew that this was happening as well. And then one of the last meetings, we had to present to folks over at City Hall, saying, hey, this is the reason why we want this and things of that sort. So that was back in April. That was back in April, May time frame, and now we're in December and we're still in that holding pattern. But I'm hoping that things will come our way, and even if we have to wait a little bit longer, I'm just excited and thrilled for a lot of the black and brown businesses that are now getting their shot and having a beer and wine license, because again, that's just another path forward of generating revenue where they're no longer having to survive, they could thrive now.
Absolutely.
That's important.
Absolutely. So and the hours are?
So right now the hours are 8 to 4. If we have this beer and wine license, and I think what we'll do for the first a couple of months or so, it's just to pilot it out. I think that we'll be looking to do 8 to 10, right? We're probably gonna have to beef up our staff, right? Because we're gonna have a day staff and an evening staff for that kind of stuff. But that's exactly what we want to do, especially because we want to transition from the cafe during the day and then transition to being a wine bar where you can get wine, you can have some beer, and then probably have some not a full-fledged menu on food, but something we could be able to give people while they're drinking.
Outstanding. In our, places, a social kind of, we lack those, particularly in communities of color,
Yeah.
right? Places where people can go in the evening. It's interesting. There's shout out to Rufus Falk and The Mix, black owned right here, and they have a gospel brunch. We had different events. In fact, we were there and had my brother-in-law, who is directly impacted, and had other folks who were directly impacted, curated this event. And it was just, again, these social kinds of events that we can kind of build black wealth,
Yeah.
and social, and even politically.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is something that we need. And I love the political piece on that as well, because I think that was one way we were looking at Ula Cafe. There was this, he's a professor at, oh my gosh, I can't remember his name, and I feel horrible because he's a phenomenal professor of African American history. And it was during, I think it was during Juneteenth. So we had a panel discussion during that time. And he was just like, Marvin, back in the day, especially in the South End, we used to have cafes, or we used to have all these different establishments where, us black young men and women will get together and we'll have conversations about politics, about how to move things forward, about these social injustice. And it was like, I feel like that's a dying art. That's a dying thing. We don't have that anymore. So, and I kept this to heart. He was like, we need places, if you do this right, if you do this for Ula, where it's not just serving phenomenal drinks and refreshments, but it's also a place where people could, of intellects or whatever the case may be, could be able to talk about what's going on in society and how to move things forward. Spot on. That's what we need within our community.
Absolutely.
And I love that. That's been kind of like my guiding principle anytime we're looking at different events at Ula. Obviously, we want to continue to make things fun and light and whatnot, but I think at the end of the day, we need to have these really tough discussions as much as we can.
Absolutely. With gentrification, right, that goes, a segue to that, right? We see what's happening, and owning property. We understand that the whole report, that I think there was even a subsequent one. I think the median income of people of color was like $8 to like
yeah. I think it was like it was like $8 and 200 some odd. Yeah. It was ridiculous.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it has everything to do with land, right? Acquisition, and we see that there's a lot of building going on, right? But it's for people in many instances that can't afford it.
Yeah.
People who are lived here who can't afford, even with the tax, proposed tax, I think 13%.
13%, yeah.
Which is
trying to divert it over to commercial and whatnot. And, there's a lot of pushback at the state level with that, and it's just like, okay, I have thoughts about that. It's just like, why are we pushing back so hard? We have, to your point, we have people that are struggling to live here, that they, and I think I saw an article, a headline, there's a good number of Massachusetts, Boston voters are thinking like, why am I living here? I thought about moving, right? Because you can't, it's really hard to afford it, but people are attached here because of either work, because of family, things of that nature. But at the same time too, we're beating them over the head when it comes to higher prices, higher value, taxes, things of that nature. That's really hurting our living, and we need to be able to change that. So I get upset about, people pushing hard on, why are you shifting over the burden over to the commercial side? And it's just like, because us as residents don't want to be able to be brunting, 13%. That is really tough for us to do as things continue to increase. Live in our shoes for a moment and see what we have to go through.
Absolutely. And the notion that a lot of these commercial spaces are dormant.
Bingo. Yeah, I think, and that's the other thing too. I think people need to take a step back and say, okay, we're not living pre-COVID time, right? Pre-COVID time, you could go to these different buildings and you will see people in their offices in there. Look, I used to be a management consultant for Accenture and Slalom, right? And every single week I would have to travel to an office somewhere around the country, or I would have to come into work inside the office in Boston. A lot of times now, post COVID,
Yes.
that's not happening,
No.
right? Because we have things such as technology that's keeping us from working to working at home. There are a lot of businesses that's it's also saying too, like, hey, I could cut a lot of overhead costs right now. Right? I don't need to rent this out. I could cut a lot of overhead costs. And, you know, the downside to that, too, is that you also have a lot of, you know, the restaurants within those areas that rely on those businesses that's no longer there to go ahead and support them. So those are big things that there are issues, too. But again, you know, if the property valuations are decreasing because we have husks as buildings now, right? And therefore taxes and things of that nature is going down as well, too. One would wonder, saying, yeah, we should shift some of that over on the commercial side. I think that makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I would say even what about repurposing, right? Like a lot of these, again, now a lot of things are online, right? Brick and mortar, commercial spaces, businesses. People are closing businesses right here in Cobman Square. Places, Gordy's, right? I mean, they're talking about so many places that are dormant,
Yeah.
right? And so in downtown, so what about ways that we can innovatively repurpose those places for housing,
Bingo,
for business, right? Like mixed, and so that it's not just commercial,
right,
but housing is the biggest issue.
Yeah, and thank you. I should have finished that piece off right there. But I think you're right, because right now, I think right now people are like, okay, we need to build. I'm a big fan of building. I'm a big fan of density because, you know, when it comes to the economics of it, you know, more supply, you know, the demand be able to handle it, increase the price, things of that nature, right? Obviously, we need to make sure we're talking with the different neighborhoods to see exactly what that looks like. We need to make sure this solution is community center, right? And I think that's truly important with every different community we go to. The biggest thing about building more, right, is that we also have a whole archaic zoning process where the process is very long. So we have, I don't know, but a ridiculous amount of projects, you know, development projects that's just in the queue, right, because of the back and forth variances and things of that nature when it comes down to it. And we're never going to meet our targeted 2030 that we're supposed to meet when it comes to the city. I believe it's 2030. However, to your point, we don't need to build as much as we would need to if we have the space, these office spaces that we can go ahead and start converting, you know, into either other small businesses or into residential homes that people could go ahead and use and leverage for themselves and their family. That's a great way for us to continue to create more housing and get people in and lower the prices that we see. I'm also a big fan of the ADUs, right? The alternate dwelling units, right? Where, you know, if you, for example, if you have a garage, you know what I mean, or a specific space that's near your property or in your house, you could use that as a dwelling unit, right? So different ways where you could be able to create more housing without the headache and heartache of going through a very long, cumbersome process would definitely be a way to go about it. Now, you know, if we're able to go ahead and do this, I think that we're going to hit a limit when it comes down to it, because not every single place, whether within the downtown area or elsewhere, is vacant. But I think that there'll be a strong start, and that could help us kind of cover, you know, the pending developments that we see in the queue. We're like, okay, well, we got to go ahead and clean this up. But in the meantime, let's go ahead and get these things going.
Some of the issues that you raised during your campaign, refresh my memory, because I'm curious how some of those solutions, some of those innovations, some of those ideas, like, say, for instance, I don't know if you talked about mass and cast. That's one. Can you refresh my memory and our memory with some of those things that we can continue to maybe to push even, you know, in this administration?
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, housing, as we were talking about, that's like on everybody's, you know, mind. And I know that we were just talking about that. So looking at making it affordable, accessible, Boston, and, you know, talking about looking at these open spaces, transitioning them into housing. The other thing on that is I talked about the zoning process. How do we make that more streamlined where we don't have to have this very long process? I think that's very important for us to go ahead and clean up the queue that we have as well. Outside of, and then another big thing, which is very controversial, but I think that's something that we need to really have a deep look into and have a conversation about. Dare if I say it, but I am for rent stabilization. There are people that are like, oh no, we need to stay away from rent stabilization. We have, and when I say rent stabilization, I'm talking about addressing the big landlords, right? With like, the 30, 40 plus units that they have, and addressing them and ensuring that there's tenants' rights that's also involved, because a lot of these big developments, you really don't have tenants' rights, right? And, at the end of your lease, there are a lot of people that are afraid of, hey, am I going to be able to afford to live here, right? Because they're probably going to, skyrocket my lease because it's well within their authority to do so.
Sure.
That's an issue. That's a problem, right?
I agree.
If we want to continue to drone into this economic development, we need to have people staying in Boston and not going elsewhere. We need to keep them here, and that's one way I believe that we could be able to do that. Outside of, and then making sure, but also caveat, we have to take care of our small landlords, right? The ones that have 2, 3, 4 units. Usually they have a great relationship with their tenants, right?
Yes.
So making sure that we're not hurting them, because a lot of times that's their business.
Sure.
So we got to make sure we take care of that. Outside of that, you brought up NAS and CAS. Huge issue. We need to do better with that. I don't think the policies that we have is really hitting the mark there. I've always looked at Mass and CAS as it should not be a Boston solution. Sure, it's happening in Boston.
Sure.
Right? But I think right now it seems that we're going around in circles with trying to figure out what can we do here in Boston. I think that it needs to be an all hands on deck approach with the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, right? And trying to figure out what resources we could be able to use at the Commonwealth level to support what's going on in Mass and CAS. What other areas that we could bring, support to these people. It shouldn't be just a Boston thing. And I say this before, when I used to work for Veteran Services, we had an initiative at the Commonwealth where our focus was to end homelessness for veterans. So imagine the money pouring in to support this initiative at the Commonwealth. You're never going to end homelessness, because you think you hit 100%, but then 2 or 3 days later, unfortunately, those numbers are coming back down. That's just the way it is. But we saw progression because there was propensity behind that, there were willpower behind that, and we had resources behind that. I think right now, when it comes to Boston and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, there's really not the willpower that we're looking into, because people are just spinning their wheels and trying to figure out who's going to really take this problem. So that's one thing I'm going to be able to look and focus on. Boston, I have 3 kids, 2 of them are in Boston public schools, right? So BPS is something that's important for me as well. The school system overall, making sure that we are properly investing in our most cherished, and I'm saying this, but it's true, our most cherished resources, and that's our future generation. That's our children, right? Because once we're long gone, they're going to be our leaders, right? So if we're not able to educate them, making sure that we're helping them and supporting them on their path of growth and development, not only are we failing them and ourselves, we're failing what the future is supposed to look like for us in America and in Boston, right?
With that said, do you support the 100% elected school committee?
So I do. And the reason why I do is because, we voted on that. About like 70% said yes on that. Yes. And I think that we need to be able to push forward with that. And B, I want to make sure that I have, just like how we have the city council, right? I want to make sure that I could be able to reach out to someone at the school committee that's an elected person and say, hey, what's going on here? I have ideas. I don't think you're hitting the target here. And I want them to know that at the end of the day, you work for us, not for just the administration. So follow our agenda and things that we want to do. I think that if we want to get to that point, I'm fine with saying, okay, right, got it. let's move from where we are now to hybrid, and then slowly becoming, fully elected. But that's something I would like to see. And then, I think there were some others as well too, but I think those are the main ticket items when it comes down to it.
Let me say this finally. Finally. So as a person in the military, and you said you get ready to have to command a
detachment. It's a small unit, but I'm a lieutenant colonel, so they're giving me something. I'm going to run with it, and it's good.
That's good. That's amazing. What are your thoughts with regard to being in the military and with our administration? That is, obviously he's your commander in chief, right? And so with deploying the military to places to under the guise of protection and in cities, and so what are your feelings about that? I know it may be a difficult thing to answer because again you're in the military, and I understand being in the military. You're but as a person who is concerned about ICE and concerned about some of these things, and so how do you the threat of turning our military against our own citizens? How do you feel about that?
It's horrible. It's horrible. And I actually had a conversation with someone about this earlier today because I'm trying to come up, and I'll tell you more about this when we get a chance, but what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to come up with an event called, we're trying to come up with a good name for it, but like kind of bridging the gap between civilians and the military / veterans, right? Because there is a gap, and it continues to grow because of what's going on currently with the Department of Defense and the White House, right? So there's a lot of questions that people have that's on the civilian side that they want to have a better understanding of, and they don't have the access to, or they think they don't have the access to the military service members or veterans to ask those questions. So I want to come with this panel discussion to talk about policies, to talk about the culture within different commands, and talk about the veterans and see how we could be able to bridge this gap, and then also ask the question of, if something were to happen, federalizing the National Guard, what's the plan of Boston or the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to address this? And these are things that I'm working with a couple people, and hopefully we could be able to get something going, within the next couple of months. So stay tuned to that one. I think that's something we need to be able to do. So there's policies, right? And then and within the military, it's on us as leaders to ensure that we are passing down the policies from our civilian leaders. But we're also hoping and praying and wishing that our senior commanders that work hand to hand with those senior civilian leaders are advising those civilian leaders on what the policy should look like for their military. Right? I'm saying all this because regarding the question on orders, right? Legal versus illegal. I know for myself, and I know for different commands that I've been part of, we have training and we have discussions on what's considered an ethical order, what's considered an illegal order, and if me, Lieutenant Colonel, Matelier, gives you an illegal order, what you can do during that time, right? And my team and I and my command and I've seen it elsewhere. We've done a decent job on making sure that our Marines, soldiers, sailors, they understand that stuff. I've seen in other commands where it was more of a let's check the box. You know what a illegal order is. Let's just leave it at that, which is also an issue, especially in today's age, that we need to be able to reinforce that as much as possible. I say all that as well because I'm also hoping that my higher ups that's more connected to the guy that's the Department of Defense or the person that's, working in the White House, the 3-star, 4-star generals, so on and so forth, they're saying, sir, ma'am, if this is something that you want us to do, you need to understand the repercussions of what this is supposed to look like. Do you understand that? We have our military lawyer here. they are telling you that this is not the way to go, right? So I'm hoping those conversations are happening. And as we've seen on the news, those conversations are happening. And unfortunately, if you do have something to say about it, you can find the door out. I want us to give a shout out to Admiral Halsey. I don't know if you heard of the name Admiral Halsey. He was the U.S. Southcom commander who decided to walk away, right, before the boat shooting, the ship shooting, and things of that nature, right? I kind of wish that there was more of a pushback because, lives were involved when it comes to that. And, unfortunately, there was another admiral who said, okay, let's go ahead and move forward with this. Now, that whole chain of command that took that order from that admiral, they're under question now, right? So that's why the way I'm looking at it, it's a push-pull relationship of information on exactly if you're getting a policy that's being sent up by the Department of Defense, hopefully that policy has been well drafted with the advisory of those commanders, those admirals, and those generals, right? And then as it's getting pushed down, especially on something that's important like this, when it comes to orders and things of that nature, the commanders, the subordinate